I said get that welfare kid out of my boardroom. Tech billionaire Richard Whitmore's voice exploded through Technova Industries as he towered over 11-year-old Darius Coleman. The boy clutched his mechanical sketches while his mother, Evelyn, frantically gathered cleaning supplies from her overturned cart. "Sir, he's just—" Evelyn started. "Just what? Teaching him to be a thief like his daddy probably was?" Whitmore's eyes blazed as he spotted the child's precise drawings. "What's this garbage?" "The safe sounds broken," Darius whispered, pointing toward the bulletproof chamber where a mysterious vault had stumped MIT engineers for 3 months. Whitmore's laughter turned savage. $500 million if you can open this safe, genius!" His voice dripped with venom. "Oh, wait. Your kind probably can't even count that high." The child's steady gaze never wavered from the man who would soon regret every word. Have you ever watched someone's cruelty become their own destruction? The glass towers of Silicon Valley stretched endlessly beyond Technova Industries' 42nd floor, but inside the marble conference room, tension crackled like electricity. 3 months ago, a power surge had turned the company's experimental safe into a $500 million tomb. The prototype AI chips inside represented 5 years of research and Technova's entire future. Now bankruptcy loomed in 48 hours. Darius Coleman shouldn't have been there at all. The 11-year-old accompanied his mother during her 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. cleaning shifts because childcare cost more than Evelyn earned in a week. While she scrubbed toilets and emptied trash, Darius sat quietly in break rooms, sketching the machines that fascinated him. Every gear, every wire, every mechanical sound found its way into his notebook. The safe had arrived from Switzerland 3 months ago, a Mosler masterpiece worth more than most people's houses. Its biometric locks, titanium shell, and quantum encryption should have made it impenetrable. Instead, a summer thunderstorm and one power fluctuation had turned cutting-edge security into an expensive puzzle box. MIT's brightest minds had failed. A team of Swiss engineers flew in and left embarrassed. Even FBI consultants walked away shaking their heads. Each attempt cost hundreds of thousands, and each failure brought Technova closer to collapse. But Darius heard something others missed. Late at night, when the building emptied and silence settled like fog, he could hear the safe's mechanical heart beating irregularly. Something was wrong with its rhythm. That's when the trouble started. Richard Whitmore had built Technova from nothing, transforming a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire. His corner office showcased awards, patents, and photos with presidents. Success had hardened him into someone who saw people as either useful or obstacles. To Whitmore, cleaning staff were invisible until their children started asking questions. The first confrontation happened on a Tuesday night. Whitmore worked late, reviewing quarterly projections that painted a grim picture. Technova's stock had dropped 30% since news of the locked safe leaked. Investors were pulling out. Contracts were being canceled. He needed coffee and found Darius in the executive break room, sketching quietly while his mother cleaned nearby offices. "What is this kid doing here?" Whitmore's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. Evelyn appeared instantly, apology already forming on her lips. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I couldn't find a babysitter tonight and—" "This isn't a daycare." His eyes fixed on Darius with undisguised disgust. "Company policy clearly states no unauthorized personnel after hours." Darius looked up from his drawings, detailed mechanical diagrams that would have impressed engineering professors. "I'm not bothering anyone, sir." "I don't care what you think you're doing." Whitmore's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Your mother works for me. You're trespassing." From that night forward, Darius spent his mother's shifts locked in the security office, watching guards play cards while Evelyn worked alone. But walls couldn't stop him from hearing. Through air vents and thin doors, the safe's irregular heartbeat called to him. 2 weeks later, the second humiliation began. Whitmore emerged from another failed meeting with potential buyers. Without access to their prototype chips, Technova had nothing to sell. Desperation was setting in when he heard a small voice from the hallway. "Excuse me, sir?" Darius stood near the safe's chamber, notebook in hand. "That sound it's making, it sounds sad." Whitmore stopped dead. 3 security guards, 2 executives, and a janitor all turned to stare at the boy who had somehow escaped the security office. "Oh, this is perfect." Whitmore's laughter echoed off marble walls. "Now the help's children think they're acoustic engineers." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Technova's head of security, watched from the shadows with growing interest. "I just meant," Darius started. "You just meant nothing." Whitmore's voice carried the authority of someone used to crushing opposition. "Maybe we should hire all the janitor kids as consultants. What do you think, Dr. Vasquez? Should we put children on the payroll?" Scattered, nervous laughter filled the hallway. Darius's cheeks burned, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he opened his notebook and showed a page covered in precise mechanical drawings. "These are the internal gears," he said softly. "I think something stuck." Whitmore snatched the notebook, his face cycling through confusion and rage. The drawings were impossibly detailed, showing components that weren't visible from outside the safe. Measurements, ratios, even stress points were marked with mathematical precision. "Where did you get these?" Whitmore's knuckles whitened as he gripped the notebook. "I drew them." Darius's voice remained steady despite the hostile stares surrounding him. "I can hear how the pieces move." "You can hear—" Whitmore's voice broke off in disbelief. Then his expression hardened into something cruel. "Look at this. Ghetto kid thinks he's an engineer." He held the notebook high, displaying Darius's work like evidence in a trial. "This is what happens when people don't know their place." With deliberate malice, Whitmore tore the first page, then another. Months of careful observation and precise documentation fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. "Stay in your lane, boy." Each word dripped with venom. "Your mother cleans toilets. You shut up and stay invisible." Darius watched his work destroyed but didn't cry. He'd memorized every line, every calculation. The notebook was just paper. The knowledge lived in his mind. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her voice cutting through the toxic atmosphere. "Richard, that was unnecessary." "Was it?" Whitmore's eyes blazed with self-righteous fury. "We're bleeding money while some welfare kid plays engineer. I won't tolerate distractions." But late that night, when Whitmore thought no one was watching, Dr. Vasquez collected the torn pages from the trash. What she saw in those fragments would change everything. The third escalation came during a company-wide meeting about Technova's uncertain future. Employees packed the main auditorium while their CEO explained the company's dire situation. Without access to their prototype chips, massive layoffs were inevitable. "We've exhausted every option," Whitmore announced to 300 worried faces. "The safe remains impenetrable." That's when Darius made his biggest mistake. He'd been sitting in the back with his mother, invisible among the crowd, when Whitmore's words sparked recognition. "It's not impenetrable," the boy said, his young voice somehow carrying across the silent auditorium. "It just reverted to 1965 operation mode." Every head turned. 300 pairs of eyes focused on an 11-year-old boy who had just contradicted their billionaire CEO in public. The silence stretched like a held breath before Whitmore's laughter shattered it. "Did everyone hear that?" His voice boomed through speakers that carried his words to every corner of the room. "Our child genius has solved what MIT couldn't." More laughter rippled through the crowd, nervous, uncertain, but growing louder as Whitmore's mockery gave them permission to join. "Please enlighten us," Whitmore continued, his tone dripping with theatrical sarcasm. "How exactly does a safe revert to anything?" Darius stood slowly, his mother's hand trying to pull him back down. When power surges hit old Mosler safes with modern upgrades, they default to original mechanical operation. The digital overlay masks the sounds, but underneath, a child is embarrassing himself. Whitmore's voice cut through the explanation like a sword. And embarrassing his mother, who clearly hasn't taught him when to speak and when to stay silent. The words hit Evelyn like physical blows. Around her, co-workers avoided eye contact while their livelihoods hung in the balance. "I apologize for my son," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You should." Whitmore's gaze fixed on Darius with laser intensity. "But apologies don't solve our problem, do they? Your boy's fantasies certainly won't." The meeting continued, but Darius had learned a terrible lesson about speaking truth to power. The fourth and final escalation came 3 days later, when desperation drove Whitmore to his breaking point. Security footage had captured Darius studying the safe during his mother's shifts. Despite being confined to the security office, the boy had somehow observed the vault's behavior patterns for weeks. His new notebook, hidden from Whitmore's previous rage, contained even more detailed analysis. Dr. Vasquez had been watching too. The fragments of Darius's original drawings had revealed an understanding of mechanical engineering that defied explanation. She'd quietly researched the boy's family and discovered something remarkable. Samuel Coleman, Darius's grandfather, had been Detroit's most respected locksmith before his death. The man who'd helped design security systems for Ford, GM, and Chrysler had apparently passed more than just tools to his grandson. But Whitmore saw only threat. "I will not have some welfare kid wandering my halls like he owns the place." The CEO's voice thundered through an emergency staff meeting. "This ends tonight." Evelyn stood before the executive table like a defendant awaiting verdict. Behind her, Darius waited in the hallway, his fate being decided by men in expensive suits. "Your son has become a distraction we cannot afford," Whitmore continued, his words carefully chosen for maximum damage. "Employees are starting to listen to a child instead of their leadership." "He's just curious about machines," Evelyn pleaded. "It's how his grandfather raised him." "His grandfather is dead, and unless you control your son, you'll both be unemployed." Whitmore leaned forward, his threat carrying the weight of absolute power. "Find another job or find another babysitter. I won't see that boy in my building again." The ultimatum hung in the air like poison gas. Evelyn's choices had narrowed to impossible: abandon her son or lose the income that kept them housed and fed. That's when fate intervened in the form of Technova's final board meeting. Investors had demanded explanations. Stock prices were cratering. The media was calling Technova's situation the most expensive lockout in corporate history. Bankruptcy papers sat ready for signature. Whitmore faced his directors like a general planning a last stand. Charts showed their dwindling resources. Every day the safe remained locked, costing another $100,000 in interest payments and lost opportunities. "We need a miracle," board member Harrison Walsh said quietly. "Or we need to accept defeat." That's when Whitmore spotted Darius's notebook lying on Dr. Vasquez's chair. The security chief had been studying the boy's latest observations. Rage exploded through the CEO's careful composure as he recognized the precise mechanical diagrams. "Are you serious?" Whitmore's voice cracked with fury. "That ghetto kid is still playing engineer while we're facing bankruptcy?" He snatched the notebook, his hands shaking with rage and desperation. Page after page revealed insights that had eluded expensive consultants. The boy had identified patterns, frequencies, and mechanical behaviors that suggested solutions. In that moment, Richard Whitmore's sanity snapped. "You know what?" He held the notebook high like a weapon. $500 million if this little ghetto genius can open our safe. Hell, I'll give his mama $1 million just for the entertainment value." The words exploded from his mouth before rational thought could stop them. Exhaustion, desperation, and racial hatred had finally converged into a challenge that would destroy everything he'd built. Dr. Vasquez spoke carefully. "Richard, if the boy actually understands the mechanism, then I'll personally hand him $500 million. Whitmore's laughter had an edge of hysteria. "Better yet, I'll make him CEO. How's that for your diversity initiatives?" The executives exchanged worried glances. Their leader was clearly unraveling, but no one dared challenge him directly. In the hallway outside, Darius pressed his small hand against the safe's cold surface and listened to its mechanical heartbeat. His grandfather's voice whispered from memory, teaching patience and precision. The boy had no idea that his billionaire tormentor had just signed his own destruction warrant. But what this 11-year-old learned from his grandfather would make Whitmore's sarcastic offer the most expensive joke in Silicon Valley history. In Detroit's Rust Belt heart, Samuel Coleman's basement workshop was a cathedral of precision. Vintage tools lined pegboard walls like surgical instruments. The air smelled of machine oil and metal shavings, punctuated by tick-tick-tick of grandfather clocks he repaired for wealthy clients who never knew his name. Samuel was Detroit's ghost genius, the black locksmith secretly consulted when automotive giants hit walls. Ford called at midnight for executive safe malfunctions. GM summoned him through service entrances when Swiss consultants failed. He arrived quietly, solved problems, and left without credit. His gift was supernatural, diagnosing any mechanism by sound alone. "Every machine has a heartbeat," he told 5-year-old Darius during their first lesson. "Close your eyes and listen." The boy sat cross-legged on concrete floors, surrounded by disassembled clocks and vintage safes. His grandfather's workshop was a mechanical museum where history lived in springs and precision-cut steel. "What do you hear, grandson?" "The big clock sounds tired. The little one sounds hungry." Samuel's weathered hands stilled. In 60 years of listening to machines, no one had described their sounds so accurately. The grandfather clock needed mainspring replacement. The mantle clock required lubrication. The gift had passed to another generation. Summer afternoons became mechanical poetry lessons. Samuel taught that wealthy people built complicated locks when frightened, but always left themselves simple escape routes. "Rich folks think complexity equals security," Samuel explained, showing Darius a 1960s Mosler safe. "But they're human. They forget combinations, panic during emergencies, so they build back doors." "Why keep back doors a secret?" "Because then they wouldn't be secrets." Samuel's fingers traced intricate mechanisms. Every lock tells a story about its owner, their fears, habits, blind spots. He opened safe after safe using techniques that seemed like magic. But Darius learned the science. Metal expansion from temperature, humidity effects on mechanisms, why certain combinations felt right to human psychology. "Your ears are better than mine," Samuel admitted when 8-year-old Darius diagnosed a timing issue he'd missed. "But ears without wisdom are just noise. Remember, listen first, think second, act third. But when you act, be certain." The motto became Darius's compass through a world that consistently underestimated him. At 9, Darius fixed the community center's heating during a December blizzard. Adult repair teams had failed for 3 days while families shivered in shelters. The boy listened to furnace rhythms, identified a valve obstruction, and restored warmth to 300 neighbors. "Lucky guess," people said. At 10, he repaired the school principal's vintage Mustang that mechanics had declared hopeless. Darius heard irregular engine breathing, traced compression issues to hairline cylinder cracks, and suggested repairs that saved Mrs. Patterson $4,000. "Someone must have helped him," they whispered. Samuel watched his grandson's gifts dismissed repeatedly. Society's blindness to black excellence was predictable as sunrise, but he prepared Darius for battles ahead. "Someday, grandson, someone will desperately need what you know. When that day comes, be ready. Not for their approval, for your purpose. Samuel's final lesson came during his last summer. Pancreatic cancer was stealing him piece by piece, but his mind remained sharp as surgical steel. "The old safes are disappearing," he told Darius, pointing toward vintage mechanisms. "Companies think digital security is better, but metal remembers. Springs remember. When electronics fail, old knowledge becomes precious." He made Darius memorize every detail about 1960s Moslers, internal architecture, psychological patterns of original owners, Depression-era mindset influencing their design. "Rich men from that time feared losing everything again," Samuel explained. "They built escape hatches using personal numbers, founding dates, anniversaries, children's birthdays. Fear made them sentimental." 3 months later, Samuel passed peacefully in his workshop chair, surrounded by machines he'd spent a lifetime understanding. Darius inherited more than tools. He carried forward philosophy transcending mechanical knowledge. Every problem had solutions if you listened carefully. Every lock had keys if you understood the lockmaker's heart. Now, working night shifts beside his mother in Silicon Valley's gleaming towers, Darius felt his grandfather's presence. The experimental safe's irregular heartbeat called to him through marble walls and bulletproof glass. Samuel's voice whispered from memory about patience, precision, and the moment when preparation meets opportunity. The boy clutched his worn notebook, filled with observations that had earned him mockery and threats, and remembered his grandfather's final words. "When they need you most, they'll fight you hardest, but truth has its own timing. Your moment will come." In Technova's conference room, where a billionaire's hatred had just created an impossible challenge, that moment was approaching faster than anyone imagined. 18 hours until bankruptcy. Technova's emergency board meeting had devolved into controlled panic as directors faced financial annihilation. Stock prices cratered 40% in 3 days. Major investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Richard Whitmore stood before the conference table where his empire was dying. Charts showed dwindling resources. Every hour the safe remained locked cost another 100,000 in interest and lost opportunities. "We need a miracle," board member Harrison Walsh said quietly. That's when Whitmore's rage-fueled challenge echoed through the room like a death sentence. $500 million if this little ghetto genius can open our safe." The words hung like poison gas while executives exchanged worried glances. Their CEO was clearly unraveling, but no one dared challenge him. Dr. Elena Vasquez cleared her throat carefully. "Richard, if the boy actually understands the mechanism, then I'll personally hand him $500 million. Better yet, I'll make him CEO." Vasquez had spent 3 days studying fragments of Darius's notebook. The boy's mechanical understanding defied explanation. His grandfather's reputation in Detroit's industrial circles was legendary. "What if we made this official?" she suggested. "Official how?" "Company-wide announcement. Full transparency. If he fails, we document exhausting every option. If he succeeds, he won't succeed, but fine. Let's give Technova one last circus before the funeral." Within an hour, every employee received emergency notification. The company's final safe attempt would be live-streamed to investors, media, and public. Technova's last card was an 11-year-old boy. The auditorium filled quickly. 300 worried employees packed seats while cameras positioned for coverage. Tech journalists expected to document the corporate death spiral. What they got was far more explosive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore's voice boomed through the speakers, "today, Technova makes its final attempt." Behind him, a massive screen showed the vault that had defeated international experts for 3 months. "I'm offering $500,000 to anyone who can open this safe." He paused, eyes scanning until they found Darius beside his mother in the back. "But wait, Our resident child prodigy thinks he knows better than MIT engineers. Every head turned toward the small black boy. Darius felt hundreds of stares but kept his expression steady. "So here's my offer," Whitmore continued, smile predatorily. $500 million if the kid can open what our best minds couldn't." Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Online viewers, live stream had attracted 50,000, exploded in comments ranging from disbelief to outrage. Of course, when he fails, both he and his mother will be permanently banned from Technova. We can't have distractions during our final days. Evelyn Coleman gripped her son's shoulder protectively. The ultimatum was clear. Failure cost them everything. Dr. Vasquez stood from the front row. "I'd like to state for the record that this child's observations show remarkable insight." "Dr. Vasquez, are you seriously validating this circus?" "I'm validating precision." She held up reconstructed notebook pages. "These drawings show understanding our consultants missed. Samuel Coleman was Detroit's most respected mechanical engineer. His grandson inherited more than tools." Samuel's name electrified the room. Older employees recognized the legendary locksmith's reputation. Suddenly, the boy wasn't just a janitor's son. He was a legacy incarnate. "Fine. Let's see if DNA trumps education." Whitmore gestured toward the safe's chamber, where technicians had positioned cameras. "The stage is yours, young genius. Show us what your grandfather's ghost taught you." Darius stood slowly. His mother's eyes reflected pride mixed with terror. 300 co-workers watched as he walked toward certain humiliation. "Wait," Vasquez called out. "For the record, what do you hear when you listen to the safe?" Darius paused, his young voice carrying clearly. "It sounds like a grandfather clock wound too tight. The mainspring fights against a secondary mechanism that shouldn't be engaged." Technical precision from an 11-year-old silenced the room. Even Whitmore's smirk faltered. "The power surge created feedback between digital systems and the original 1965 mechanical core," Darius continued. "Electronic security failed, but instead of defaulting to open, it triggered Depression-era protocols protecting against total system failure." Vasquez nodded. "That explains why electronic bypass attempts failed. Electronics can't override psychological security. The backup system isn't about technology. It's about understanding who commissioned this safe in 1965. Whitmore's laughter exploded through speakers. "Psychology! The boy thinks he's a therapist!" But the live stream audience was captivated. Comments poured faster than moderators could process. Viewer count surged past 100,000 as social media amplified the story. Hashtags trended, #500 million safe, #young genius, #David vs. Goliath. Major news outlets picked up the feed. This wasn't just corporate drama. It was David versus Goliath with racial justice undertones resonating across platforms. "The challenge stands," Whitmore announced with finality. $500 million if this child succeeds, permanent banishment if he fails." Darius approached the safe's chamber like a gladiator entering the arena. Behind bulletproof glass, the massive vault waited, steel mountain that had humbled the world's finest minds. He unpacked his grandfather's worn leather tool roll, each implement polished by decades of use. Against the safe's bulk, antique tools looked impossibly small. "Any final words of wisdom?" Whitmore called mockingly. Darius looked back at the crowd, finding his mother's face among hundreds. "My grandfather taught me that rich people make complicated locks when scared, but they always leave simple ways for themselves." "What makes you understand fear better than MIT graduates?" The boy's answer was barely a whisper, but the acoustics carried it clearly. "Because scared people think like my grandfather did during the Depression, and he taught me how they think." For the first time, Whitmore felt uncertainty flicker. The boy's confidence wasn't bravado. It was quiet certainty backed by generational knowledge. But $500 million was impossible. The challenge was safe, wasn't it? The auditorium fell silent as Darius approached the bulletproof chamber housing Technova's $500 million mystery. Camera feeds broadcasted his small figure against the industrial safe to over 150,000 viewers worldwide. Comments flooded social media platforms faster than moderators could process. Behind the glass, the vault loomed like a metallic monolith, 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, weighing nearly 3 tons. Swiss engineering merged with American craftsmanship in a security masterpiece that had defeated the world's most sophisticated minds. But Darius saw something else entirely. He pressed his small ear against the cold bulletproof barrier, closing his eyes as his grandfather had taught him. The auditorium's air conditioning hummed. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, elevator cables whispered through building shafts. But beneath it all, the safe sang its mechanical secrets to anyone willing to listen. First revelation: the auditory miracle. 1965 Mosler Banker's Pride, model BP 2400, serial number ending in 447, manufactured in Hamilton, Ohio between March and June of that year. Darius's voice carried clearly through the chamber's audio system. Every word hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Vasquez pulled up Technova's acquisition records on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. The safe's documentation appeared, specifications that had required weeks of research when the company first purchased the vault. Serial number BP 2400-447. Manufacture date May 1965, Hamilton, Ohio. Model Banker's Pride. Perfect accuracy from sound alone. "That's impossible," whispered Harrison Walsh from the board seat. "Those records weren't public."
How could he?
"The gear ratios," Darius continued, his small hands tracing invisible patterns against the glass. "Mosler used a specific 4.7 to 1 reduction in their 1965 luxury models. I can hear the harmonic frequencies when internal mechanisms engage. It's like a fingerprint." Whitmore's laughter had an edge of hysteria. "Lucky guess. Anyone could have researched those specifications." But Dr. Vasquez was already pulling additional documentation, manufacturing details that weren't in public records, technical specifications that required security clearance to access, details that an 11-year-old janitor's son shouldn't have known. Everything Darius said was checked out. "The original owner was someone who survived the 1929 crash," the boy added, his ear still pressed against the barrier. "I can hear it in the backup mechanism's design philosophy. This isn't just about keeping people out. It's about keeping wealth safe during total system collapse." The livestream audience exploded. Viewer count surged past 200,000 as major news networks began broadcasting the feed. #GeniusChild and #500 million safe dominated trending topics across social platforms. In the auditorium, 300 employees sat in stunned silence as an 11-year-old demonstrated knowledge that had eluded international experts. Mosler's 1965 luxury line incorporated Depression-era psychological security, Darius explained, his young voice carrying technical precision that chilled the room. Rich clients who'd lived through financial collapse wanted more than electronic locks. They wanted mechanical certainty that would function even if the entire electrical grid failed. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly, her professional respect growing with each revelation. That would explain why our electronic bypass attempts triggered additional security protocols instead of opening the vault. "The safe doesn't trust electronics," Darius said simply. "It was designed by people who'd watched their fortunes disappear overnight when systems they trusted failed them." Whitmore's confidence began cracking like ice under pressure. The boy's explanations weren't guesswork. They demonstrated understanding of historical psychology, mechanical engineering, and acoustic analysis that defied explanation. Second revelation: historical pattern recognition. Darius stepped back from the glass, his expression thoughtful. "The power surge 3 months ago didn't break anything. It triggered a fail-safe that returned the safe to 1965 operational mode. "Explain," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice tight with professional curiosity. Modern digital overlays were added to update the safe's security, but the original mechanical heart remained intact. When electrical systems detected anomalous power fluctuations, they assumed the building was under attack. The boy's hands moved as he spoke, illustrating concepts that Harvard engineering professors would struggle to explain clearly. During the 1960s, wealthy individuals feared both government seizure and social upheaval. They programmed their safes to lock down completely if external systems suggested crisis conditions. The power surge convinced the safe that society was collapsing. Murmurs rippled through the auditorium. Online viewers shared the feed across platforms, adding commentary that ranged from amazement to disbelief. "So while our consultants focused on modern electronics," Vasquez said slowly, "the safe had actually reverted to Depression-era operation protocols." Exactly. It's not malfunctioning. It's protecting itself exactly as designed. The original owner programmed psychological fail-safes based on trauma from 1929. They built this safe to survive another Great Depression. Whitmore's face had gone pale beneath his artificial tan. That's speculation. You can't possibly know the original owner's psychological state." "I can hear it in the mechanism's response patterns," Darius replied calmly. "Fear leaves mechanical fingerprints. Cautious people wind springs tighter. Traumatized people build redundant systems. Wealthy people who'd lost everything once designed escape routes only they understand." The explanation hit me like a revelation. Every failed attempt to open the safe had approached it as a modern security device. But this 11-year-old understood it as a historical artifact built by psychological survivors of economic catastrophe. Third revelation: the master touch. "The final sequence requires 3 simultaneous conditions," Darius announced, his voice carrying new authority. "Mechanical manipulation, psychological understanding, and perfect timing based on internal temperature cycles." He knelt beside his grandfather's tool roll, selecting instruments worn smooth by generations of use. Against the safe's industrial bulk, the antique tools looked impossibly delicate. Modern consultants applied force and technology, but this safe responds to finesse and patience. The original owner was someone who understood that true security comes from subtlety, not strength. "What kind of timing?" Dr. Vasquez asked, now completely invested in the boy's methodology. "Metal expands and contracts with temperature variations. The safe's internal mechanisms operate on tolerances measured in thousandths of inches. At specific temperature points, clearances align to allow proper sequential operation." Darius checked a small thermometer from his grandfather's kit, an instrument that looked older than the building they stood in. "We're approaching optimal thermal conditions now. In approximately 6 minutes, internal metal expansion will reach the precise point where the 1965 backup sequence can engage." The specificity was staggering. No consultant had considered temperature-based timing. No expert had calculated thermal expansion effects on mechanical clearances. But even with perfect timing, the sequence requires understanding the original owner's psychological patterns, Darius continued. This particular safe was commissioned by someone who'd lived through financial collapse. They chose backup combinations based on personal significance, not random numbers. "How could you possibly know what numbers meant something to a dead person?" Whitmore's voice cracked with desperation. "Because scared people think alike," Darius replied with devastating simplicity. "My grandfather taught me that wealthy survivors of the Depression used similar psychological patterns, important dates that gave them hope during dark times, usually company founding dates, children's birth dates, or anniversary dates, numbers that reminded them why they were fighting to rebuild." The boy's hands moved over his tools with surgical precision, selecting each instrument for specific mechanical purposes that the audience couldn't understand, but somehow trusted completely. "Technova's original building was constructed in 1963, Darius noted, The safe was installed 2 years later. I'm betting the original owner chose numbers connected to this company's founding because it represented new hope after old losses. Whitmore's breathing had become labored. Everything the boy said made terrible sense. The safe wasn't just a security device. It was a psychological artifact from an era when wealthy people had learned not to trust anything except their own carefully hidden secrets. The combination isn't random, Darius concluded, his small fingers poised over instruments that seemed impossibly inadequate for the task ahead. It's emotional, and emotions follow patterns that my grandfather spent 60 years learning to read. The auditorium held its breath. Online viewer count had surged past 300,000 as news networks interrupted regular programming. Social media exploded with real-time commentary from mechanical engineers, historians, and psychology professors who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. "Temperature approaching optimal range," Darius announced quietly. "The safe is ready to remember 1965. For the first time since issuing his challenge, Richard Whitmore understood that he might have made the most expensive mistake in corporate history. The boy's confidence wasn't childish bravado. It was quiet certainty backed by generational wisdom, perfect acoustic analysis, and understanding that transcended anything MIT had taught. Darius looked up at the cameras broadcasting his every move to hundreds of thousands of viewers worldwide. "My grandfather always said that rich people make the hardest locks, but they always leave the easiest ways in for themselves. Now I'm going to show you what he meant." The temperature gauge in Darius's weathered thermometer hit the precise mark his grandfather had taught him to recognize. Metal expansion had reached optimal alignment. Internal mechanisms that had remained frozen for 3 months were ready to dance again. Absolute silence filled the auditorium. 300 employees held their breath while 350,000 viewers worldwide watched through live stream feeds that had crashed news websites and dominated social media trends. Darius knelt before the massive safe, like a young knight facing an ancient dragon. His grandfather's antique tools gleamed under camera lights, instruments that had opened thousands of locks across 6 decades of patient craftsmanship. "Beginning the sequence," he whispered, his small voice carrying clearly through audio systems. "Remember, this safe thinks it's 1965. I have to think like someone from that time, too." His tiny fingers found the safe's primary dial, worn smooth by countless attempts from frustrated experts. But where others had applied force and technology, Darius offered gentle conversation. "Hello, old friend," he murmured, words that Samuel Coleman had taught him to speak to stubborn mechanisms. "I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt. But it's time to trust again." The dial responded to feather touches that barely disturbed its surface. Darius's movements flowed like water, each rotation precise to fractions of degrees that his ears detected through microscopic changes in internal resistance. First number, 19. The year Technova's founder had been born, etched into corporate history that Darius had memorized from lobby plaques. Click. The sound was barely audible, but Darius's trained ear caught the subtle shift in mechanical tension. One tumbler had fallen into place after 3 months of stubborn resistance. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her professional fascination overriding workplace protocol. "How did you know that number?" "Scared rich people choose numbers that remind them why they're fighting," Darius replied without breaking concentration. Mr. Harrison founded Technova to prove his father wrong. His birth year represented the beginning of his determination. Second number, 63. The year Technova's first building had been constructed, representing hope rebuilt from ashes. Click. Another tumbler surrendered to patient precision. The safe's mechanical heartbeat changed rhythm, ancient springs relaxing as they recognized the psychological keys Samuel Coleman had taught his grandson to find. Whitmore's hands shook as sweat stained his $5,000 suit. The boy's explanations made terrible sense. The safe's original owner had indeed programmed backup sequences using emotionally significant numbers that reminded him why wealth was worth protecting.
"This can't be happening,"
Whitmore whispered, but his voice carried clearly through the auditorium's perfect acoustics. "It's happening because you made it happen," Darius said softly, his concentration never wavering from the delicate work before him. "You thought my grandfather's wisdom was worthless, but wisdom doesn't care what you think." Third number, 65, the year the safe itself had been commissioned, representing the moment when trauma transformed into security. Click. The final tumbler fell into place with a sound like distant thunder. Internal mechanisms that had remained frozen for 93 days began moving again, responding to commands from an 11-year-old boy who understood their psychological DNA. "Now comes the hard part," Darius breathed, his small hands selecting his grandfather's most delicate tool, a timing instrument designed for watchmaker precision. The mechanical sequence requires perfect rhythm. Too fast and the failsafe engages. Too slow and the system resets. It has to flow like music that only the safe can hear. His fingers began the final dance Samuel Coleman had taught him during those precious summer afternoons in Detroit's basement workshop. Touch light as butterfly wings. Timing precise as heartbeats. Patience is infinite as love. The safe responded to whispered mechanical poetry that transcended textbook knowledge. Springs sang. Gears harmonized. Ancient security protocols recognized the gentle authority of someone who understood their deepest fears. Evelyn Coleman pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son perform miracles with tools older than she was. Around her, 300 co-workers had forgotten to breathe. Online viewers erupted in comments that crashed servers and spawned hashtags trending across 6 continents. News anchors interrupted regular programming. Financial markets suspended trading on Technova stock pending extraordinary developments. "Almost there," Darius whispered, his young voice carrying the weight of generations. "Just like Grandpa Samuel taught me. When you find the heart of the machine, touch it like you're waking someone you love." The final sequence required 3 simultaneous actions that had defeated every expert who'd attempted them. But Darius performed them with fluid grace that made complexity look like simplicity itself. His left hand provided mechanical pressure. His right hand monitored acoustic feedback. His heart provided the patience that only comes from understanding machines as living beings with their own fears and hopes. 3 perfect clicks in rhythm with a child's heartbeat. Brief pause as ancient systems recognized legitimate access. Then, with a sound like distant thunder rolling across summer skies, the massive safe door swung open smoothly under the tiny hand of an 11-year-old boy. Inside, gleaming prototype AI chips worth exactly $500 million reflected camera lights like technological treasure that had waited 3 months for someone wise enough to understand that the oldest keys sometimes open the newest doors. The auditorium exploded. The explosion of applause lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Camera feeds captured tears streaming down faces of hardened executives who'd witnessed the impossible. Online viewers crashed Technova's servers as 400,000 people simultaneously tried to share footage of an 11-year-old boy opening a safe that had defeated MIT. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the first to act. "Emergency board resolution," she announced, her voice cutting through celebration with professional authority. "Technova hereby establishes the Samuel Coleman Young Genius Fellowship Program, effective immediately." She stood before the auditorium like a general delivering victory terms. "Darius Coleman will receive full educational funding from elementary through doctoral studies, personal mentorship by industry leaders, and immediate enrollment in Stanford's Gifted Youth Academy." Harrison Walsh nodded from the board seating. "Motion approved unanimously. The boy's patent application for auditory mechanical analysis method will be filed under his name with full corporate backing." "Furthermore," Dr. Vasquez continued, her smile growing wider, Evelyn Coleman is hereby promoted to Director of Facilities Management with a starting salary of $120,000 annually, plus comprehensive health care and housing assistance. Evelyn collapsed into her seat, overcome by reversals of fortune that seemed too magnificent to believe. Her son had just transformed their lives with knowledge passed down through generations of undervalued brilliance. The company will also establish the Samuel Coleman Innovation Workshop, Vasquez announced, a fully equipped laboratory where young minds can explore mechanical engineering with proper tools and guidance. Darius stood before the opened safe, his grandfather's worn tools still in his small hands. Around him, corporate executives applauded like he was a conquering hero rather than a janitor's son who'd been threatened with banishment hours earlier. "There's one more thing," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice carrying emotional weight. "Samuel Coleman's tools will be permanently displayed in our main lobby with the inscription, 'Dedicated to masters who teach the future. Wisdom has no color. Genius has no age.'" The boy's eyes filled with tears at the honor paid to his grandfather's memory. Samuel's basement workshop wisdom had just elevated his grandson from poverty to promise in a single afternoon. But this was only the beginning. Major universities were already reaching out. Engineering societies wanted him as their youngest member. Tech companies competed to sponsor his education. An 11-year-old had just proven that underestimation is merely an opportunity waiting for its moment to shine. Within 6 hours, Richard Whitmore's racist mockery had exploded across every social platform on Earth. The hashtag number 500,000,000safe became the most viral corporate story in internet history, accompanied by video compilations of his cruelest moments toward an 11-year-old genius. The destruction unfolded with surgical precision. Hour 1. News outlets picked up the live stream footage. CNN, BBC, and Fox News interrupted regular programming to broadcast Darius's triumph alongside Whitmore's venomous quotes. "You people probably can't even count that high," played on infinite repeat across cable networks. Hour 6. Technova's stock price began cratering as investors fled a company led by someone who'd publicly humiliated a child genius. Trading volume exploded as institutional investors dumped shares worth billions. Hour 12. Corporate partners issued statements distancing themselves from Whitmore's unacceptable behavior. Microsoft, Google, and Apple canceled pending contracts worth hundreds of millions, citing fundamental misalignment with our values. Hour 18. The emergency board meeting convened with one item on the agenda: damage control. Harrison Walsh read prepared statements from major shareholders demanding immediate action. "Richard," Walsh said, his voice carrying finality, "the board has lost confidence in your leadership. Your behavior toward that child has created irreparable damage to our corporate reputation." Whitmore sat alone at the conference table where he'd once wielded absolute power. Around him, directors who'd feared his authority now delivered unanimous verdict. "This is an overreaction," Whitmore protested, but his voice carried no conviction. "Market volatility will settle. The media cycle will move on." "The media cycle has made you the face of corporate racism," board member Sarah Carter replied coldly. "Our largest investors are questioning whether Technova can survive association with your leadership." Hour 24. The vote was unanimous. Richard Whitmore was terminated as CEO effective immediately, with minimal severance and forfeiture of stock options worth $15 million. Dr. Elena Vasquez was named interim CEO to a standing ovation from employees who'd witnessed Whitmore's cruelty for years. Hour 36. Social media justice accelerated beyond corporate walls. Had Whitmore out-trended globally as millions shared their own stories of workplace racism. The billionaire's personal Twitter account was suspended after death threats overwhelmed platform moderators. Forbes removed Whitmore from their wealth rankings. LinkedIn deactivated his profile. Country clubs revoked his memberships. The social infrastructure of wealth crumbled under viral outrage. Hour 48. Legal consequences materialized as civil rights organizations filed discrimination lawsuits. The NAACP announced a formal investigation into Technova's workplace culture under Whitmore's leadership. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: his own recorded words. Security footage from the past 6 months revealed a pattern of racist behavior that destroyed any claim of isolated incidents. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of calculated humiliation was preserved in high definition. The man who'd built an empire through technical innovation was destroyed by technology's perfect memory. The ultimate irony. Whitmore's $500 million if you can open this safe challenge became the most expensive joke in corporate history. His net worth collapsed from $50 million to negative territory as legal fees mounted and assets were seized to cover corporate damages. Corporate revolution. Under Dr. Vasquez's leadership, Technova implemented sweeping changes. The All Minds Matter initiative provided educational support for employee families. Cleaning staff received profit sharing and unprecedented respect. The company became an industry leader in diversity and inclusion. Evelyn Coleman's promotion inspired other service workers to speak up about their own brilliant children. Samuel Coleman's workshop techniques were incorporated into engineering curricula at major universities. Perfect justice. Whitmore had created his own destruction through filmed cruelty broadcast to millions. No revenge was necessary. His own words and actions had provided complete accountability. The man who'd dismissed an 11-year-old genius as worthless learned that wisdom has its own timing, and karma keeps perfect books. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest consequences. Sometimes the cruelest jokes become the most expensive lessons. And sometimes a dead grandfather's teachings become a living boy's triumph over institutional hatred. 1 year later, 12-year-old Darius Coleman leads Technova's Hidden Genius initiative, discovering brilliant minds in unexpected places. Under Dr. Vasquez's inclusive leadership, the company's stock reached all-time highs while revolutionizing how Silicon Valley values human potential. Samuel Coleman's basement workshop was reconstructed as Technova's Heritage Innovation Lab, where vintage tools guide cutting-edge discoveries. The inscription reads, "Where wisdom meets tomorrow, honoring those who teach the future." Richard Whitmore's former corner office became Darius's study space, where a boy once dismissed as worthless now designs technology that serves underrepresented communities. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Sometimes the biggest fortunes aren't measured in dollars, but in wisdom passed through generations of underestimated brilliance. If you were Whitmore, would you have recognized Darius's genius or let prejudice blind you to talent? Sharp-eyed viewers will notice at minute 423 that Darius already knew the safe's internal structure, proving genius was there all along. Subscribe if you believe that underestimation is just an opportunity waiting for its perfect moment to shine. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't defined by others' limitations.